They kicked me out of the house the day my husband died, but revenge was served cold. I knew something was wrong the second the key refused to turn. It was a cold Monday morning in late January, the kind that hangs in the air like a breath that never quite exhales. I had just returned from St. Joseph's Hospital, still in the same jeans I'd been wearing for 2 days, still carrying the same overnight bag I'd packed when Ethan collapsed. The bouquet in my left hand, roses and lilies from his coworkers, had wilted in the backseat of my car overnight. My eyes were swollen, lips cracked from too much crying and too little sleep. I had watched my husband die in the cardiac unit 12 hours earlier. I wasn't ready to face the silence of our house, but I also wasn't ready for what I saw instead. I stepped onto the porch and slid my key into the front door. It jammed. I pulled it out, tried again. Nothing. My heart stuttered. I checked the spare key, the one hidden behind the loose porch stone. Still no luck. It was like the lock had forgotten me, or worse, rejected me. That's when I noticed the curtains. The white linen ones I'd hemmed myself were gone, replaced by thick velvet panels and a garish floral print I'd never seen before. My stomach dropped. I peered closer through the narrow slit between fabric and wall, squinting against the morning glare. Inside, the living room was cluttered with boxes, cardboard towers where there should have been clean space. A pink velvet pillow sat on my reading chair, a floral teacup on the coffee table. And then I saw her, Diana, my mother-in-law, wearing a navy cardigan and a smile that sent ice crawling down my spine. She was sipping tea, my tea, from the wedding china Ethan and I had saved 3 years to buy. Across from her, casually tossing throw blankets into a basket, was Jocelyn, Ethan's younger sister. They were laughing, moving in like I didn't exist. Ethan hadn't died the night before. I knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, fists trembling, throat raw. After what felt like forever, the door cracked open. Diana's figure filled the frame, composed and calm, her arms folded tightly across her chest like she'd been preparing for this moment for years. "Rachel," she said, tilting her head, "didn't expect you so soon. What's going on?" My voice shook. "Why can't I open the door?" She leaned against the frame, perfectly poised. "Because, dear, you don't live here anymore." My mouth opened, but no sound came. I blinked to her, sure I'd misheard. "Excuse me?" Diana's smile didn't waver.
"Ethan paid for this house. My son, not you. There was no prenup, no child, and no real contribution on your part. It's time this house returned to his real family." For a moment, I thought the cold I felt was from the weather, but it wasn't. It was coming from her. "I'm his wife," I whispered. "We bought this house together. I refinanced it when his business failed." "Oh, please," Diana cut me off, waving a dismissive hand. "You played house while he worked. Now that he's gone, your lease is up." Behind her, Jocelyn appeared with 2 of my serving plates in hand. "You left the side door unlocked when you went to the hospital," she said with a smirk. "We figured you wouldn't mind." I felt my knees wobble. I laughed, not out of humor, but the kind of hollow, stunned disbelief that bubbles up when reality snaps too sharply to bear. "What's so funny?" Diana narrowed her eyes. I steadied myself, wiped a tear that I wasn't even sure came from sadness anymore. "You're unpacking pillows and pouring tea in a house you think belongs to you, but you have no idea what you've just stepped into." The smile on Diana's face faltered, just for a second. It was the only crack I needed. I turned and walked back to my car. My keys were useless now, but I had something better, something she didn't know about yet. And by the time I was done, Diana would wish she'd never touched a single cup in my kitchen. 2 years earlier, almost to the day, I sat at the edge of our front porch, this very porch, watching Ethan run his hands through his hair in frustration. It was January then, too, just colder, darker. His startup had collapsed the week before. The bank had frozen his business accounts. His credit score had tanked. I remember the way he couldn't look at me directly when he said it. They might take the house, Rachel. He wasn't a weak man, but that day I saw him cracked open in a way I never had before. It was the same house Diana now claimed belonged to the real family. I made a decision the next morning, quietly, without a word to Ethan. I got dressed, drove to the credit union, and started the refinance process. I moved the mortgage into my name, using the small nest egg I'd been saving since I left my interior design job 10 years ago. I hadn't told anyone, not Ethan, not my parents, and certainly not Diana. She would have used it as proof that he had failed as a man. The process took weeks. I picked up freelance jobs to start making the payments. Ethan never asked where the mortgage confirmations were going. He was too busy recovering. Emotionally, physically, I kept things afloat. Fixed the faucet, budgeted the groceries, painted the hallway. I watched our home survive on the strength of my silence. Diana, of course, never knew. She only visited on holidays, never stayed long. She hated the South, thought Savannah was too humid, too soft, too forgiving. I'd hear her voice echo through the guest room. Ethan, you were meant for more than this floral wallpaper and street jazz. And Ethan would smile, that tired smile, and whispered to me later in bed, "She just doesn't understand peace." I never wanted to confront her. Not then, not even now. I just wanted space to grieve, to be alone in the only place that still smelled like him.
Instead, she changed the locks. I sat in my car outside the house for a long time after that confrontation. The January air seeped into my coat, but I didn't move. I didn't cry. It was like my body didn't even know how to react anymore. How do you process being widowed and homeless on the same day? Eventually, I drove to a motel just off Highway 204, a place that reeked of bleach and mold and something vaguely chemical. I used Ethan's emergency credit card, the only one still active, and rented a room for 3 nights. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my bag. I hadn't packed clothes, just hospital papers, a book I'd never opened, and the last voicemail Ethan left me the night before his heart gave out. I played it once, twice, then I shut my phone off. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept picturing Diana sitting in my chair, Jocelyn eating off my plates, the hallway filled with boxes of their things. They hadn't even let the body go cold before staking their claim. The next morning, Tuesday, I woke up to the sound of church bells. St. Francis down the street rang them every hour. I sat up slowly, brushed the knots out of my hair, and stared at the blank motel ceiling. My fingers ached from clenching the sheets all night. My throat burned. And then I did something I never imagined myself doing. I picked up the phone and called the funeral home. "Good morning, St. Matthew's Memorial. This is Margaret?" "Yes," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "This is Rachel Monroe. I need to update the guest list for Ethan Monroe's service." A pause. "Of course, Mrs. Monroe. What changes would you like to make?" I didn't hesitate. "Remove Diana Monroe and Jocelyn Monroe from the list." Another pause. This time longer. "Understood." I ended the call before she could ask why. It wasn't spite. It wasn't vengeance. Not yet. It was boundary. The first one I had drawn in over a decade of holding my tongue. And for the first time since Ethan died, I felt something that almost resembled control. Tuesday afternoon, I returned to the house. Not through the front, but by circling the block and parking discreetly behind the row of hedges that separated our backyard from the neighbors. I waited, watched. Diana's car wasn't in the driveway. No sign of Jocelyn either. The side door, the one leading from the laundry room to the back porch, had always had a faulty latch. Ethan meant to fix it for months. I knew how to slip it open without a sound. Inside, the house smelled different. Not bad, just foreign. The lavender air fresheners I hated were everywhere. My framed photos had vanished from the hallway walls, replaced by landscape prints I didn't recognize. There was a sharp pang in my chest as I realized someone had rearranged the toe pillows on the couch. Ethan's side of the sofa was empty. No blanket, no coffee mug, no trace. I didn't have time to mourn. I moved quickly. Ethan's office was tucked in the back of the house, between the guest room and the laundry. A small, windowless room filled with wires, books, and the smell of his cologne. Diana hated that space. She called it a digital junkyard. That's why I figured she wouldn't touch it. I was right. The room was just as he left it. Chaotic, overly organized in that way only he understood. Papers stacked into columns, seats half-sorted, USB drives labeled in his neat, all-caps handwriting. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the silence settle around me like a second skin. Then I went to work. Top drawer, receipts from a freelance job. Second drawer, business cards, old flash drives, and a sticky note reminding him to cancel a dentist appointment. I rifled through them all, unsure what I was looking for, just chasing a memory, or maybe a signature. Anything that could tie him, this place, and me back together. And then I saw it. A slim black folder wedged between two instruction manuals on his desk. Across the top in his unmistakable hand, postnup, do not discard. I froze. We never signed a prenup. Not once. We married in our mid-30s, broke but in love, trusting each other implicitly. Ethan joked that paperwork ruined the romance. But a postnup? I opened the folder slowly. Inside were 3 printed pages on legal letterhead, dated 2 weeks after our second anniversary. I scanned for my name, his name, signatures, terms, and there it was, under a highlighted clause. In the event of the husband's passing, all jointly owned assets, including real estate, are to be transferred wholly to Rachel Monroe unless otherwise specified in a last will and testament. There was no will. But this was binding. At the back of the folder, I found a folded sheet of notebook paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Ethan's casual slant, darker ink than usual, 4 short lines. Rach, if you're reading this, it means something awful happened. If Mom tries anything, show this to your lawyer. You know how she is. Keep this safe. E. My breath caught. It was the first time I'd seen his handwriting since the hospital. The curve of the R in my name, the way he still signed just E like a note passed in class. My knees buckled and I had to sit down. I read the note twice, 3 times. My heart ached with something too complicated to name. Grief, vindication, guilt, maybe even gratitude. Ethan knew. On some level, he knew Diana wouldn't stop. And despite all his flaws, he had tried to protect me the only way he knew how. I tucked the folder into my coat and left the house through the back door, just as I had come in. That night, back at the motel, I didn't sleep again, but I didn't cry either. Instead, I stayed up rereading the postnup until the words stopped blurring. By sunrise, I had called Angela Flores, my old college roommate turned real estate attorney, and scheduled a meeting. Because now I had the paperwork and just enough anger to use it. Wednesday afternoon arrived gray and listless. the kind of day where even the sun seemed reluctant to show up. I had just returned from my meeting with Angela, who, despite not seeing me in years, wrapped me in a hug like no time had passed. She didn't ask how I was, just looked me in the eye and said, "We're going to make this right." I was halfway through a bowl of instant soup in the motel kitchenette when I heard it. The sharp knock at the door. 3 quick raps. The kind of knock that carries entitlement. I opened the curtain just enough to see the outline of Diana standing outside, dressed in black like she'd walked straight out of a soap opera. Next to her was a man in a gray suit, square jaw, clipboard in hand, wedding band gleaming. Lawyer. I didn't open the door. Instead, I stepped outside, coat zipped to the chin, folder in hand. I closed the motel room behind me and met them in the parking lot where the wind whipped Diana's scarf sideways. "Rachel," she said, smiling thinly, "this is Mr. Langley, my family attorney. We're here to discuss next steps regarding the house." "Next steps," I repeated, my voice even.
Diana nodded like this was a real estate negotiation between civil parties and not a home invasion staged during a funeral week. Since Ethan left no will, his estate, including the house, is subject to division among next of kin. As his mother and sister, we have legal rights. "I'm his wife," I said, "the only legal spouse." Mr. Langley cleared his throat, already uncomfortable. "What Mrs. Monroe means is that without a clear testamentary directive, probate law permits certain—" "I'm so glad you're both here," I interrupted, calm but firm. "Saves me a trip to your office." I held up the black folder. Diana's smile faltered. "This is a notarized post-nuptial agreement," I said. "Signed 3 years ago. 2 witnesses, legal letterhead. It transfers all shared assets to me, the spouse, in the event of Ethan's death." I let the silence sink in. Mr. Langley reached out. "May I see that document?" "No," I said quickly, pulling the folder back. "You'll get a copy through official channels. I've already retained counsel." Diana's expression cracked, just slightly. "You're bluffing," she hissed. "Am I?" I asked, stepping back toward my motel door. "Because if I'm bluffing, you should feel confident enough to go back to your car and celebrate. But if I'm not, then you've committed trespassing, unlawful entry, and you've tampered with property that doesn't belong to you." Mr. Langley took a step away from her, subtly. "You don't get to win this time," Diana said, her voice lower now, venom barely concealed. "You were never part of our family. You stole my son from us." I tilted my head. "He wasn't a trophy. He was a man, and I didn't steal him. You pushed him away the second he stopped living by your script." I didn't wait for her to reply. I turned my back and walked inside, locking the door behind me. From the window, I watched them stand in silence for a few seconds before Diana spun around, climbing into the passenger seat like a queen in retreat. The lawyer followed, awkward and flustered. They didn't knock again. That night, I sat on the edge of the motel bed and opened Ethan's letter again. I ran my fingers across the ink, wondering if he ever imagined how fast she'd come for me, how shameless she'd be. Maybe he had. Maybe that's why he wrote it. I didn't sleep much. The adrenaline made rest impossible. My hands kept twitching, my breath came in shallow bursts, but something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was preparing, and the next move would be mine. By Friday morning, the motel room felt like it had absorbed my grief. The air was thick with damp coffee grounds and unopened envelopes. I was sitting at the small fold-out table trying to focus on sorting the funeral arrangements again. Music, eulogy, seating plan, when I noticed the envelope. No stamp, no return address, just slid under the door sometime during the night. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. Inside was a neatly typed document from the Chatham County Probate Court. The letterhead was crisp, the ink fresh. My name was printed in bold near the top. Rachel Monroe, respondent. My pulse jumped. To whom concerned? This court has received a formal petition filed by Mrs. Diana Monroe, mother of the late Ethan Monroe, challenging the validity of the property transfer and post-nuptial agreement dated June 5th, 3 years prior.
The petitioner alleges that undue influence, mental distress, and coercion may have impacted the decisions of Mr. Monroe in the months preceding his death. I stopped reading.
She was accusing me of manipulating him, of controlling him while he was weak, of exploiting the man I loved in order to steal his house. I dropped the letter on the table like it burned my skin. The rage that flooded me was slow and hot, like molasses over flame. Not explosive, not even loud. Just steady, just final. I picked up my phone and called Angela. "I figured you'd call," she said before I could say anything. "She's saying I coerced him, that I forced him to sign the postnup." Angela's voice was calm. Too calm. "That's not new. It's what people do when they don't have legal footing. They sling mud and hope something sticks." "She wants to take everything," I whispered. "Not just the house. She wants to rewrite who he was, who we were." "She wants control," Angela corrected. "This isn't about money, Rachel. It never was." I stared at the corner of the ceiling, feeling that cold motel air wrap around my ankles. "I want to fight her," I said. "Not just stop her. I want to destroy her." Angela paused. Then her tone shifted. Steel under velvet. "Good. But we do it smart. You don't speak to her. You don't respond. You let me build this like a wall, one brick at a time." We hung up. I stared at the court letter for a long time, then folded it, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it into my suitcase. That afternoon, I received a text message from a number I hadn't seen in over a year. James Harding, Ethan's former business partner. "Hey, Rachel. I don't want to get involved, but Diana reached out. She asked about Ethan's mental state during the last few months. Wanted to know if I had emails, medical stuff, anything about confusion or forgetfulness. I didn't say anything, but she mentioned that one investor meeting. Remember? He came back pretty out of it. I just wanted to give you a heads up." I stared at the message until the screen went dark. Of course I remembered that day. 3 months before Ethan died, he'd come home from a client meeting pale and shaken, said he forgot where he parked, forgot the name of the guy he just met. He blamed it on stress, insomnia, too much caffeine. But Diana, she must have gotten wind of it. She was building a case. If she could convince the court that Ethan hadn't been of sound mind, even if it was all circumstantial, she could unravel everything. Undue influence was hard to disprove, especially if it came with whispers, with concerned family and unanswered questions. That was the moment I remembered something Ethan said, almost offhand, one night after dinner. "I have an appointment at St. Michael's next week, neurology, just to rule stuff out, probably nothing." I hadn't gone with him. He told me not to worry. I scrambled off the bed, yanked open my suitcase, pulled out the folder of documents, and dumped it across the bedspread. I tore through everything: utility bills, mortgage receipts, old birthday cards, even a dentist reminder. Then, tucked inside a pile of unopened mail from 3 months ago, I found it. A sealed envelope from St. Michael's Neurology Clinic. I opened it with shaking fingers. "Dear Mr. Monroe, following your recent cognitive assessment, we are pleased to inform you that your results fall within the normal range. No signs of early cognitive decline were detected." I read it 3 times before I finally let out the breath I'd been holding for a week. He had been okay, and now I had proof. Monday morning. 1 week since Ethan died. 5 days since Diana filed the petition. 72 hours since I found the neurologist letter that would change everything. The courthouse on Montgomery Street was cold even in spring. Steel benches, marble floors, that sterile echo of shoes clicking, paper shuffling, and whispered accusations. Angela met me on the steps. Hair in a tight bun, folder in hand, eyes sharp. "Are you ready?" she asked softly. "I am," I said. And I was. For the first time in days, I stood with both feet grounded. Inside, the courtroom wasn't full. Just a scattering of people.
Diana in the front row. Dressed in funeral black lace, her posture immaculate. A tissue already clutched like a prop. Jocelyn sat beside her, head bowed. The perfect daughter in mourning, On their side, Mr. Langley, the same man with the clipboard from the motel. I didn't look at them. Angela and I sat at the respondents' table. My hands trembled under the surface, but I kept my back straight. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to protect what Ethan and I had built. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver glasses and tired eyes, called the session to order. Mr. Langley went first. His voice was careful, gentle, designed to paint Diana as a concerned mother, not a bitter one. He spoke of Ethan's sudden demise, of unanswered questions, of documents signed during times of emotional vulnerability. He avoided the word coercion, but let it hover in the air like smoke. Diana pried once, right on cue. Angela stood slowly when it was our turn. She didn't perform. She didn't raise her voice. She simply laid down the facts, like cards in a poker game. The notarized postnup, the house deed in my name, the mortgage payments made exclusively from my account, and finally, the letter from St. Michael's Neurology, signed, dated, sealed. Angela handed the copy to the judge and said one sentence that quieted the entire room. This is dated 3 months before Mr. Monroe's death and confirms his full mental capacity. Mr. Langley stammered, tried to pivot. Even so, Your Honor, we must consider the emotional dynamics. Do you have documentation, medical records, testimony from a licensed physician, any evidence of diminished capacity? He faltered. No, Your Honor. Then I see no grounds, the judge said, already writing. The post-nuptial agreement is legally binding. The deed is in Mrs. Monroe's name. This house legally belongs to her. Case dismissed. Just like that. The gavel came down like thunder in my ears. I didn't cheer. I didn't smile. I just exhaled. Long, slow, silent. The kind of breath you don't realize you've been holding until you finally let it go. Outside the courthouse, the sky was a deep blue. Birds chirped in the oak trees like nothing had happened at all. I didn't expect her to follow me, but she did. Diana caught up on the courthouse steps, heels clicking like gunshots on stone. You may have won the house, but you will never erase me. I'm his mother. I turned slowly. You already erased yourself, she blinked. What? You erased yourself the moment you tried to rewrite who he was. The moment you broke into our home, stole his things, lied under oath. Ethan knew who you were, Diana. That's why he wrote the letter. That's why he signed the postnup.
Her face cracked. Not much, but enough. I leaned in. And if you come near me again, I won't need a courtroom to protect myself. I've already filed the restraining order. She stepped back. You can't keep me from his funeral, she hissed. I already did, I replied, without raising my voice. I called the funeral home the morning after you changed the locks. Your name is off the list. If you show up, they'll escort you out. Her mouth twisted. You vindictive little... No, I said, cutting her off. I'm not vindictive. I'm free. And I walked away, head high, not once looking back. The chapel smelled like lilies and cedar polish. It was Tuesday, exactly 1 week after Ethan's heart gave out. The service had been scheduled for noon, but by 11:15, the pews were already filling. Friends, neighbors, a few of Ethan's old clients. Some had driven in from Atlanta, others from Charleston. Many hadn't seen us in years. I'm so sorry, they whispered as they hugged me. He loved you so much. He always talked about your garden plans. He said you were the only calm he ever knew. I nodded, smiled softly, swallowed words I couldn't afford to speak. Angela arrived just before 11:30 and sat quietly near the front, not as my attorney today, but as a friend. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to.
The musicians tuned quietly in the corner. The minister stood near the altar flipping through notes. The urn sat on a small table wrapped in blue velvet, Ethan's favorite color. I'd chosen it myself, and then I saw them. Two silhouettes slipping into the back pew, barely noticeable if you weren't looking, but I was. Diana, Jocelyn, dressed in black, perfectly coordinated, hair pinned, veil subtle but unmistakable, mourning clothes, theater costumes, masks. They weren't on the guest list. I'd made sure of that. The funeral home had assured me they would be stopped at the door, but someone must have looked away at the wrong moment. And now there they were, pretending to belong. I stood frozen for a moment, staring across the chapel. My breath caught, my heart pounded, not from grief, but fury. I had buried Ethan once already. I would not let them dig him up for show. Angela turned toward me slightly. "Want me to handle it?" she whispered. I shook my head. "No, I'll do it myself." I walked slowly down the aisle, heels echoing in the sudden silence. Every head turned. The music paused. Even the minister stepped aside, sensing something sacred in motion. When I reached the back, Diana looked up. Her smile was small. Jocelyn's eyes flickered away. "You're not supposed to be here," I said quietly. "We're not leaving," Diana replied, voice low and proud. "I gave birth to him." "Then you should have respected his wishes. I'm his mother. And I'm his wife." My tone didn't rise. "The only one he chose." She straightened, defiant. "You can't keep me from his funeral." "Not mourning," I said. "Performing." She blinked. "I will walk out right now, and I'll take the minister with me. We'll finish the service at a park, at a parking lot, at a kitchen table. I don't care. But you will not sit here and pretend you didn't try to erase him. You don't get to use his death for dignity you never earned." For a second, no one moved. Then Jocelyn's voice broke the silence. "Mom," she said softly, without meeting anyone's eyes, "we're not wanted here. Let's stop pretending." She stood. And slowly, Diana followed. There was no scene, no screaming, no tug of war. Just the sound of two pairs of heels walking away, and the soft click of the chapel door closing behind them. When I turned back toward the altar, the entire room exhaled. I walked slowly to the front. The music resumed. The minister nodded, and with my hands steady, I stood before Ethan's urn and said goodbye. Not surrounded by liars, not interrupted by venom, but wrapped in silence, in truth, and in the love of people who actually knew who he was. And for the first time since he died, I felt peace. The day after the funeral, the house was silent. Not the kind of silence that comforts, but the kind that watches you, waits for you to crack. I stood at the kitchen sink in Ethan's old sweatshirt, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but I hadn't moved. Outside the window, the garden was bare, just turned soil and the beginnings of what would come later. Maybe, if I could keep going. I turned around slowly, half expecting to see Ethan sitting at the table, humming some off-key song, legs kicked up like he always did. But the chair was empty. The mug was his. The silence was mine. I had survived the funeral, survived court, but I hadn't stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. So when I looked out the front window and saw Diana's car parked across the street, I wasn't surprised. It was early, barely 7 a.m. The engine was off, the windows rolled halfway down. A slow stream of cigarette smoke curled through the air. She sat still, hands resting on the wheel, staring straight ahead. She didn't knock, didn't approach, just watched. I didn't move either. I didn't call Angela. I didn't take a picture for evidence. I just picked up my coffee, walked calmly out onto the front porch, and stood there, barefoot, hair undone, mug in hand. I met her eyes. She flicked her cigarette out the window, the car rumbled to life, and then she drove away. No threats, no shouting, no final word. Just gone. But I knew it wasn't surrender. It was retreat. A reminder. Her way of saying, I still exist. I went back inside, locked the door, and exhaled. That night I didn't sleep, not from fear, not anymore, but from something quieter, heavier, like my body was still bracing for impact, even when the danger had passed. For 3 days, she didn't come back. I spent them cleaning, sorting Ethan's files, touching every drawer and surface he'd once used. The process was brutal. Each receipt a memory, each pen with his bite mark a tiny cut to the chest. On the third afternoon, I found his old gardening notebook, the one he used to fill with plans, doodles, dreams of a backyard space where things could grow without judgment. He had drawn marigolds, labeled every seed, even taped down a packet with a note, "For Wretch, one day when you're ready." I wasn't ready, but I went outside anyway. I dug where he marked, turned the soil with bare hands, planted every seed, watered them gently, sat beside them as the sun went down. And for a moment, I forgot the lawsuits, the accusations, the funeral seating chart. I remembered his hands, his laugh, his stupid gardening hat. And when I went back to the front door that night, I found the envelope. No stamp, no handwriting, just 6 words printed in bold block font on a sheet of plain paper. This house will always be mine. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed. Not bitterly, not out of rage, just lightly, with something that sounded like release. She had nothing left. No claim, no proof, no presence. Just 6 words from a woman who had already been removed from my will, my wedding, my life. I took the paper outside, walked to the garden, dug a small hole in the soil under Ethan's marigold bed, buried the letter deep, covered it with earth, fertilizer. I thought maybe something good would grow from it. I brushed the dirt from my fingers and whispered, "You don't hunt me anymore." Then I went inside and made tea with cinnamon, because Ethan always said grief needed something sweet. Spring came early that year. The air smelled like turned earth and lemon blossoms. The garden outside, once just dark soil and scribbled dreams in Ethan's notebook, was beginning to stir. Shoots pushed through the dirt, small and stubborn. Green things fought their way toward the sun. Every morning I watched them, coffee in hand, wrapped in Ethan's flannel shirt. No makeup, no expectations, just breath. I didn't hear from Diana again. Not a letter, not a phone call, not another car parked across the street. Whether it was the restraining order or the garden or simply the truth finally sinking in, I didn't know. And I didn't care. She was no longer present, just a shadow in the rearview mirror, a past tense. The house changed with the season. I painted the guest room a soft sage green, took down the photos she'd replaced, and put up new ones. Of me and Ethan at the lake, of our dog Max before he passed, of sunsets we'd chased instead of arguments we had avoided. I cleaned out the office, but left one drawer untouched. His drawer. Not as a shrine, just as a promise. Some nights I sat by the window and talked to him aloud about the garden, about the marigolds, about how somehow I was still here. I didn't expect answers.
But sometimes the wind shifted just right, and I felt less alone. I also went back to work. Not out of desperation, but out of choice. I reopened my interior design business. Small at first, one client at a time. A grieving widow who wanted to repaint her kitchen to feel less like his space. A retired couple building a sunroom to grow orchids. A young woman who just left her fiancé and wanted her apartment to feel like hers again. They didn't know my story, but I saw pieces of myself in every one of them. I designed like I was planting, with care, with vision, with a quiet kind of power. One Saturday morning, as I trimmed back the rosemary in the kitchen window, I noticed an envelope had arrived by regular mail. No threats, just a check. A refund from the funeral home. The card inside said, "You handled everything with grace. Ethan would have been proud." No signature, no return address. But I recognized the handwriting. It was Jocelyn's. I tucked the note into the back of Ethan's garden journal. It didn't change the past, didn't fix anything, but it was something. And something was enough. By early summer, the marigolds bloomed in full. A burst of gold and orange, so bright they almost looked like fire. I sat beside them, barefoot, dirt under my nails, sun on my cheeks, and I whispered the final thing I needed to say. I didn't win because I took something from you, Diana. I won because I refused to let you take me. The wind rustled through the leaves. The chimes on the porch sang a soft, crooked song. And somewhere inside the air, I could almost hear Ethan laugh. They always say that grief fades with time. It doesn't. It changes. It shifts. It softens at the edges maybe, but it never disappears. It just folds itself into your routine, into the tea you make in the morning, into the silence between songs on the radio, into the way your hand still reaches for someone who isn't there. Ethan is gone. That is the truth. But so is the woman I used to be. The woman who kept the peace at any cost, who let her mother-in-law speak over her, push her out, claim what wasn't hers, who sat at the end of long dinners, smiling through invisible wounds, who disappeared so someone else could feel seen. That woman died the day Ethan did. And in her place, I planted something else. Not revenge, not bitterness, just roots. The garden out back is wild now. Not messy, not untamed, just alive.
Marigolds and mint, rosemary and lavender. I added a bench near the back fence, beneath the maple tree Ethan once wanted to hang wind chimes from. I sit there some evenings, not to cry, but to remember who I've become. It turns out the sweetest revenge isn't courtroom victory. It's the quiet click of a door locking from the inside. It's drinking coffee in your own kitchen without fear. It's breathing deeply in a space that no longer smells like shame. I don't tell people everything that happened. Not always. But when someone asks, some widow at church, some woman at the market whose hands shake while she writes a check, I tell them the truth in pieces. I tell them, you don't have to be polite to someone who erases you. You're not selfish for locking your doors. You don't owe anyone access to your peace. And then I tell them about the garden, how it bloomed from a battlefield, how it feeds me, calms me, holds me, how sometimes something small and beautiful can grow exactly where you thought your world had ended. That's not a metaphor. That's survival. And now, months later, I don't walk like I used to. I don't apologize for taking up space. I don't explain why I changed the locks. I don't flinch when I pass that stretch of road where her car once sat, silent and waiting. Because she's not waiting anymore. She lost. And I'm not angry. I'm just done. This house is mine. This life is mine. This voice, this calm, steady, stubborn voice, is finally mine, and I'll never hand it over again. Drop a like and subscribe for more stories that prove sometimes the universe knows exactly what it's doing. See you in the next one.